everyone, and welcome. In this class, we're going to talk about rights in real estate. Rights in real estate, we're going to cover real estate as property, real versus personal property, regulation of real estate, real property interests. We're also going to cover water rights. A simple definition of real estate is that it is air, water, land, and everything affixed to the land. Real estate in the United States may be owned privately by individuals and private entities or publicly by government entities. Ownership rights, not absolute, meaning that others may exert claims against one's property. So here we're saying that if you own a piece of property, you don't have absolute or fee simple rights. Others may exert claims against one's property. And we're going to talk about what that means. The first thing we think of are liens or encumbrance. But there are going to be several different ways where other people or third parties can have rights to your property that you owned. Practitioners must know what rights and interests parties have in a given property. And again, we're going to talk about that a little later. We're going to know the difference between land and real estate and real property and personal property. Again, we mentioned land. Land is the surface and natural things attached to it. It is also the subsurface underneath the land and also the air above the surface. Key characteristics of land is that land is immobile, which means you can't pick up your land and move it to a different location. Land is also indestructible. Indestructible meaning that yes, you can stick a piece of dynamite to it or you can burn the land, but remember, land encompasses underneath the surface as well. So we're talking about all the way down to the bottom of the earth. So land is indestructible and it is heterogeneous, which means no two pieces of land are alike. You can have the same shape, the same acreage amount, or the same lot size, but because they are in two different distinct locations, they are not alike. Okay. So that covers land and the physical characteristics. Now let's talk about real estate. What is real estate? Real estate is going to be everything that land encompasses. Now we're going to include any and all man-made attachments to the land. Now we can call that real estate. So when we have the land, and we build that house or that barn, now we have what we call real estate. This diagram shows you what land is, and then it shows you what real estate is. Let's move over to property. In common understanding, property is something that is owned by someone. In order for something to be called property, there has to be ownership. If you have an abandoned car that's sitting on the side of the road and no one claims it, it's not property. property has to be owned and claimed by someone. Let's talk about a person's bundle of rights. What are their rights when you own a piece of property? When you buy a house, you have what we call the bundle of rights. You have the right to possess that property. You have the right to use it. You have the right to transfer it, meaning sell it or will it, put it in someone else's name. You have the right of exclusion, to not allow anyone to come on your property. You have a right of encumbrance, which means you can use your property as collateral, or someone else has that option to place a lien on your property. Let's say you didn't have some repairs, you had some repairs done, but you never paid for them. That contractor can place a lien on your property, which would take away one of your bundle of rights. Now they have a right. An encumbrance will restrict your right. Remember that. It restricts your right. It allows a third party to have interest in your property. Okay. Now let's talk about what is real property and what is personal property. The easiest way to remember what real property is going to be something that's attached. It's going to be attached to the land, just like a house. Personal property is going to be something, think about something movable that you can pick up and just move easily. That would be a boat, a car, an RV. These are things that falls under the category of ownership. We have intangibles. Tangibles would be your jewelry. An intangible would be a stock certificate or copyright that you own. This is still your property. Types of properties. Let's move back and we're going to focus on real property. Again, real estate. Real property rights. Any of the bundle of rights. Remember we talked about the right to possess, the right to use, the right to exclude, the right to transfer, the right to encumber. Any of these rights are going to be applied to your airspace rights. So you'll have air rights. You'll have surface rights. That's the land on or above your surface. And then we have our subsurface rights. That's below the ground. And you can have mineral rights underneath. Underneath that surface, we can have mineral rights. And this is just a diagram for that. Also, we have water rights. If your property, and we're speaking of a community property, not your personal property where you have water on your particular land. We're talking about a community where we have several residents and several houses that abuts either a lake or river or stream or ocean or sea. You have some type of body of water. Water rights basically concern the rights to own and use water that are found in those named places I just named. In addition, They determine where parcel boundaries can be fixed with respect to adjoining bodies of water. What water rights does an owner of a property that contains or adjoins a body of water enjoy? The answer is going to depend on three variables: whether the state controls the water, whether the water is moving, or whether the water is navigable. Let's talk about what the doctrine of prior appropriation says. Water is a resource necessary for survival. Some states, particularly those where water is scarce, have taken on a legal position that the state owns and controls all bodies of water. This is called the doctrine of prior appropriation. This position requires that property owners obtain permits for use of water. Let's talk about littoral rights. Littoral rights are going to be applied to seas and lakes. These are properties that are abutting property owners own the land to the high water mark or of the shoreland. The state owns the underlying land. So if the lake is 10 feet deep, once we hit land, the state owns that. Okay, the state owns the underlying land. So if you own 1 acre and your land abuts a lake, you have water rights to the high water mark of that shoreline. Riparian rights. Riparian rights concern properties abutting moving water, such as streams and rivers. Abutting property owners own the land to the water's edge, and the state owns the underlying land. So you do own the land to the water's edge if it's navigable. If it's non-navigable, the owner owns the land to midpoint of the waterway. And here we have an example. Now let's talk about real property versus personal property. Items in real or personal property, depending on attachment criteria and other circumstances. So the word fixture. A fixture is an item that started out as personal property and then became converted to real property by attachment. That can be your chandelier, your ceiling fan, your dishwasher. To know whether or not something is a fixture, we have these criteria. Was the intent when the item was put up, was the intention for that item to stay permanently? Adaptation. Did we cut a hole in the wall or in the window to fit the window air conditioner perfectly so that it could adapt to that? Functionality. Do we need this item in order for it to function properly? Let me give you a good example because I just got stumped on functionality. If an item is vital to the operation of the building, it may be deemed a fixture, even though perhaps easily removable. A window unit, air conditioner, and detachable solar panels are possible examples. So that's going to be the example of functionality. And I put window air conditioner for adaptation, which could be, because adaptation is something that's custom designed to accommodate an item. Relationship of the parties. If a tenant installs a fixture in order to conduct business, the fixture may be considered a trade fixture, which is the tenant's personal property. Then we have contract provisions. If the sale or lease transaction agrees that the personal item stays and all parties agree upon it, then based on the contract provisions, it's going to be part of the property. It will be considered real property or personal property, vice versa. And here are some examples of real property and personal property. Okay, I mentioned trade fixtures, which are considered personal property. When you hear trade fixture, trade, think about business. Someone doing business. This is personal property temporarily attached to real estate to conduct business. The items will be removed at some point. Example, grocery store refrigerators, dental chairs, barber chairs, restaurant equipment. Although they've attached certain equipment, these items are going to be expected to be removed when the business is no longer in service. Or if they've moved, gone out of business, changed location, they're taking all of their equipment with them, whether it's been attached or not. This is still, we're under personal property. Implements, plants or crops are considered personal property, since human intervention is necessary for planting and harvest. When you think about personal property, plants and crops, think about perennials, something that has to be planted every year. That's going to be personal property or implements. Now we're going to move into personal property with mobile homes. Mobile homes, because they are still on wheels, you can move them around, whether they're RVs, as long as they're not attached to the land, they are considered personal properties. Cars are considered personal property. Conversion. We're going to talk about converting real property to personal property to real property. Transferring real property to personal property is called severance, like you sever something. We have trees. Remember, if it's attached to the land, it's real property. So we have trees, but once those trees are severed or cut down, it's personal property. Now we have lumber. That's converting real property to personal. Now let's turn personal property into real property. Personal property could be a chandelier that you picked up at your local hardware store. Once you affix it or attach it to the ceiling, wired it up, It's now real property. It started out as personal, now it's real property. Although the Constitution guarantees private ownership of real estate, laws and regulations at every level of government qualify and limit individual real property ownership and the bundle of rights associated with it. So the areas of regulation, let's start with the federal. Federal regulation grant rights of ownership. They control broad land usage standards, regulates anti-discrimination laws. Examples, they regulate the land grants, federal flood zones, fair housing zones, FHA, which is the Federal Housing Administration, and EPA. Now let's move over to the state regulations. They're going to govern the state that governs the real estate business as well as set region usage standards. Okay. Now with local. Local levies real estate taxes. They control specific uses, example, property assessing, zoning, building permits. Also, we have judicial regulation that applies to case law and common law to disputes. Contrast with statutory laws. Case law consists of decisions based on a judicial precedence. Common law is the collective body of law deriving from custom and generally accepted practice in society. Examples, agency disputes, estate and inheritance disputes. All right, this ends our second chapter. I hope you learned something. Go back and review this video and read through your chapter so that you can get a lot more detailed information. What I just gave you was a big summary. See you in the next video.